te mana ki tō tātou kai kaunihera Stu Kneebone, ana I whakamihi atu ki a koutou katoa no reira a ki ino I tātou. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, ki a mā kene ki uta, ki a mā taratara ki tai. E he ake ana tāta kura, e tio, e hoka, e hauhunga ti he mau I ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Ke a koe te mana I ho.
Kura, nevo. Kei te mihi atu ki te kaihanga, ko ea rā, Timatanga me te Whakamutanga, ana mea katoa. Whakawhanaungatanga, kingi tu heitea pōtatau, te whirowhiro te kua whutu, e noho mai rā e ronga I ka hure o tapu moana tuku nā tōnā whaoki pai Māori. Ka whikitu ana te mihi I te whare o te hiuhiu, te mana ariki o Ngāti tu whare toa nā mihi. Nā mati, wari koutou, koutou I wainga, ki te ringi kaha, o Aitua, o te tātūkoro, tai rāwhiti, huriri, haere ki toa o te pai o pai mahara, waihau mātou. Araha mai. It's off there, so it should be, it's not me, I don't think. I'll come down here after that.
So you can.
Araha mai koutou. Enare,
Yeah.
Yes.
What in Atamari, still learning the technology here. For Danny Lachlan Takuinga, as Stu pointed out, from the Te Whare Māori Trust Board, and I have Judy Harris also from our board. And we have Peter Shepherd, our team. Pam, want to say anything?
Kia tau te korawai araha o te wahinaro ki runga, kia tātou, tai atura ki te ariki nui o Ngāti tu whare toa. He te motiatia de nako kia tātou, tine mate o te rohi moi mai rā koutou. He aku manukura o te poari o Ngāti tu whare toa. Tēnā koutou. Ko Pamela Story, tēnā tōku ingoa. It's a tremendous pleasure for me to be here today. Thank you, Stu, for the Karakia and the welcome. Firstly, I would just like to acknowledge those who are currently dealing with the aftermath of the cyclone. I know that it's probably touched your whānau, our whānau, and I know that that's a struggle that people are working their way through, and hopefully, as Waikato Regional Council, we are able to support in that process. This is my first time with you as the chair of the Waikato Regional Council. I suppose just a little bit of background about me. I grew up in Richland, Washington, in the United States and at the foot of Rattlesnake Mountain and along the shores of the Columbia River. And then I married a Kiwi dairy farmer and settled in the North Waikato 27 years ago. So, so certainly Aotearoa is my what I consider my home now. So it's a real pleasure to be with you here today, and I look forward to continuing to develop a positive working relationship between the Waikato Regional Council and the Tuwharetoa Māori Trust Board. Look forward to positive exchange and working together to address the issues that come before this committee. Kia ora.
Thank you for those kind words, Pamela. Yes, it's, I mean, obviously I know a number of people around this room. Bruce, you're new, kia ora. But yes, looking forward to reconnecting. As you're aware, I went to the old office, and that's kind of how long it's been since we've had a face-to-face meeting here in Hamilton. Yes, good to be kanohi ki te kanohi, as they say. So my day job is Ngāti Tuwharetoa Fisheries. Been on the trustee for Tuwharetoa Māori Trust Board for 16 odd years, and just recently became a councillor on Taupo District Council. So I Googled Pamela before I came here, so I know that if I need any advice on nuclear power stations, you're the lady to see. So, yeah, I think we'll kick off if you're happy. I'll
Sure. Since we do have some
just
new
do the one around,
councillors,
yeah.
should we
yeah.
I do see Councillor. All right, Councillor Downard, we're just going to go around and introduce those in the room. So we'll start with you.
Morning, everyone. My apologies for not being there. Naturally, I saw Tuwharetoa and I thought it'd be in their rohi, so I was up in your council chambers, Danny, and very disappointed I never got the call to get a ride up in the limousine, Tuwharetoa limousine with you and Judy. As you well know, Maori isn't my language, but it's in my heart. You know, that's what happens when you start stealing too many lunches. That's Taipi College, and you got kicked out when you were 15. So, you know, I didn't learn the language or English that well. So, apologies for not talking to you in our language. So, there in my heart, but yeah, apologies for not being there.
Just for the sake of Councillor Downard online, in case he can't see everybody, we'll just go around the room.
Hello? Oh, yes. Hey, ko tongariro te maunga, ko taupo te maunga, ko Tuwharetoa te iwi, ko te tangata. Ko taupo hau, ko Judy Harris, taku ingoa. I am one of the current trustees for the Tuwharetoa Māori Trust Board.
Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora anō, Stu Kneebone. I'm a councillor for the Waipa King Country, grew up in Tito and now farm in Cambridge. Kia ora tātou.
Karakia, ko Bruce Clarkson ahau, tōku monga ko Taranaki, tōku awa ko Waipuku, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi. I'm a first-time councillor here, representing the Karakia Hamilton constituency. I'm really pleased to meet you all. Greetings to Tuwharetoa.
Did you want to say anything, Chris, or?
I wasn't sure if you're going to go around staff or not. Yeah, Chris McLeay, Chief Executive, Waikato Regional Council. Kia ora.
Do we want to? Yep. There we go, Molly.
Kia ora tātou, Tracy May. I've got to look and see what I do. Director of Science Policy and Information here at Waikato Regional Council. So grew up in Taupo, and my dad went to school with Danny's dad.
All right. So, sorry, Neville.
Te Māori anō koutou katoa e tai mai nei, ko Neville Williams tōku ingoa, he uri a hau o hauraki no te iwi o Ngāti Pūkenga, Ngāti Maru hoki, e mihi atu nei kia koutou katoa. My mahi here is the Director, Customer Community and Services, and our iwi Māori unit, Tairanga Whenua, that organises all of this activity is within my team. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, we'll go to the apologies. So I've got apologies from Trustee Nahere Wall and Tanganui Kingi, as well as Councillor Katarina Hodge, and Councillor Clarkson has got early departure at 11:30. All right, so do I have a
Chair, I'll move. I'm happy to move.
moved by Judy, seconded by Councillor Kneebone. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right.
So the next item is confirmation of agenda, which you have in front of you in the pack. Assuming there's going to be no changes, I'm just going to call for a mover for the agenda. Stu Kneebone, seconded.
Aye.
Judy Harris. Aye. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Aye.
All right, next is disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest with regard to items on the agenda or additional interests that have not already been disclosed in the register? Nope. All right, move on.
Okay, so the next item is confirmation of the previous minutes. I'm happy to move those as an attendee. I'll just ask for a seconder. Ideally, someone who is present. Stu, you would have been there. You weren't there. Ooh. It doesn't have to be.
I was there.
So Judy. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Ka pai.
All right, so we go to, this is item 7 on our agenda. This is page 12. JMA obligations and review update. And we have Mali Ahipeni from WRC to take us through this item.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. E aku rangatira tēnā koutou. Thank you for putting up the PowerPoint presentation, James. So the purpose of this item is just to give you an update on the review of the Joint Management Agreement. The JMA contains provisions that require one, an initial review and then a periodic review, which is ongoing periodic review. And that review is now due. You may recall, for those of you that are returning, so Trustee Lachlan and Harris, who have been with us for some time, that back in October 2021, so quite some time ago now, the co-governance committee at that time approved the scope for our review. Essentially, the review is focused on performance via a quantitative review against two things. One, our JMA obligations report, and also the provisions in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. Next slide, please, James. And so this slide here just is a snip, I guess, of the JMA obligations report. The full report is attached to this item in the agenda. Essentially, it provides high-level reporting to track how we're progressing against the obligations within the JMA. This report was initiated back in 2019, and it sets out the key clauses from the joint management agreement within a spreadsheet, and then it assesses how well we're doing against those obligations. And so you'll see assessment criteria are on track, complete, delivery issues, and yet to begin. Next slide, please. With regard to the assessment against the NPS-FM, National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, the key clauses in the context of partnership with river iwi were identified and listed in a spreadsheet form. Again, the spreadsheet is attached to the item in your agenda, and on the slide is just a snip as an example of what that looks like. The analysis is colour-coded, using the traffic light colours to signal how effective the JMA is against the NPS-FM. So green indicates that the JMA is completely aligned with a particular obligation. Orange indicates partial or potential alignment, and red indicates that the JMA doesn't address the NPS-FM obligation at all. Next slide, please, James. So the approach. Over the course of the last 2 years, we have undertaken internal engagement and external engagement. So essentially internal engagement with staff from both organisations. We've had some discussions with other river iwi because joint management agreements, all 5, are due for review. So we're having similar discussions with other iwi. We've come to the co-governance committee a couple of times now, 1 to initiate the process and 2 to provide an update. We've completed the assessment and the analysis against the 2 things, JMA obligations report and the NPS-FM. And so the purpose of this item is to give you an overview of the analysis and identify next steps from here. Next slide, please, James. So what did the assessment, I guess, what are the results? In summary, when we look at the assessment against the NPS-FM, we have concluded that the JMA does include some broad obligation to work together on freshwater management. In fact, it provides a solid basis for the work between Council and Te Whare Māori Trust Board to manage freshwater. It's also important to highlight that the JMA should be able to respond to not just our current context for freshwater management, but any future freshwater management policy. And so it would be short-sighted for Council and the Trust Board to want to align our JMA specifically with the NPS-FM. It also highlighted that there is an opportunity for both parties to consider whether some of the provisions that are currently within the JMA might be extended to include other freshwater bodies within Ngāti Tū Whare Toa area of interest. However, we would need to carefully consider how that may, the implications that of other iwi with interest within the rohe and other iwi authorities as well. And so the next step, I guess, will need to think that through very carefully before any change comes about in that respect. Moving on to the next slide, thanks, James. Looking at the assessment against the current JMA provisions, you'll see in the dashboard that there are 16 clauses in total that aren't being met and are assessed as either having delivery issues or yet to start. And so these are the issues that we looked at in greater detail to ascertain what the issue is or the barriers to delivery. With regard to, and so I'll just take you through a few key points in relation to the assessment against the current JMA provisions. Although the requirement to undertake joint decision making in relation to notified resource consent applications has not been triggered, one issue that we've discovered is that that particular provision is potentially an issue as it relates to a new obligation on the Regional Council as a result of the more recent Ngāti Tūwharetoa Settlement Act that was settled back in 2018. So this act clearly came about after the joint management agreement was established between the two parties. And so this review does present an opportunity for us to look closely at that provision and just make sure that it isn't going to cause us any issue should this obligation be triggered at some point in the future. With regard to review timeframe, it's currently, as mentioned earlier on, we must undertake a review every 2 years. From our experience, 2 years is probably too short a timeframe because essentially you finish a review and you're needing to start the next review pretty quickly thereafter. Also, at least one of our other JMA include a review clause or time period of 5 years. And so what we would like to see is consistency between joint management agreements where it is appropriate. And so this certainly is the opportunity to revise that timeframe. Look, in the report itself, I hadn't flagged this additional clause that might require further consideration through the review process, but I've popped it up in the slide. And it's certainly articulated in the attached dashboard. Our staff, both at the council and the trust, have over the years often talked about catchment management activities within the catchment. However, there is no provision within the joint management agreement itself that addresses how we will work together when undertaking catchment management related action. And so this certainly provides an opportunity to put something in the agreement. All other clauses that were assessed as not being delivered or yet to start do remain relevant and important, but the key reason for not being able to deliver on these obligations comes down to resourcing and capacity. We have a long list of work together and, of course, work with others. And so that other work often becomes a greater priority. However, we do acknowledge that moving forward, greater focus on meeting our obligations under the joint management agreement is certainly what we would like to focus on at an operational level, and will include ongoing reporting to the Co-Governance Committee to demonstrate how well we're doing to meet our obligations. One other key point that is of relevance is the pending changes to the resource management system and the implications of that change on our obligations to work together, particularly as it relates to joint decision making. This is an issue. We're not entirely certain that the system that will exist beyond reform will continue to meet that joint decision commitment that is currently in the joint management agreement. And so we would also like to take a closer look at that and come back to the Co-Governance Committee with a view of what the implications may be. Next slide, please, James. And I think this is the last slide. Yes, next steps. And so just in wrapping this up, the next step from here will be to, I guess, engage some legal expertise to look at drafting of some potential changes and improvements to the joint management agreement, taking a look at the RMA reform to determine the implications on our obligations, and also consider the wider context of joint management agreement reviews with other river iwi to ensure consistency where it is appropriate to do so. And so that's it in a nutshell. I'll leave it there and invite any questions.
Committee members, are there any questions? So we're all comfortable with those next steps that are being proposed? Oh, sorry, have we got a hand up? Oh, Councillor Downard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and morning, Marley. I suppose it comes down just those two things. When do we make the decision to go from 2 years to 5 years? Because most things are 5 years, and like these, the layers of onions, they just seem to, take up all the money than actually, getting to the work we need. The second thing is and I don't know whether this is the right forum, but if we wanted to change, do we go through this forum? If we wanted to change, like for instance, the Tongariro River into a national significance river, and what process we go through that. I'm not sure whether I should bring that up now or whether that's with, excuse my pronunciation again, Kanapa Napa, is it? Does it go through those channels?
I'm going to go, oh, sorry, go ahead, Molly. Did you have something you wanted to say, or else I'll go to Director May?
No.
Kia ora, thank you, and thanks, Councillor Downard. So we have on the agenda item 10, freshwater update. That's where we'll be giving a bit more of a detailed update on our review to our freshwater plan. That's when we potentially can pick that item up there, where we will be required to go through a process to identify, in conjunction with iwi and hapu, our outstanding water bodies in the region. So I think we can pick that matter up there.
Kia ora, thank you, Tracy. And just to add, with regard to your questions, Councillor Downard, in terms of updating the JMA review period from 2 to 5 years, that decision is yet to come. What we intend to do is come back to the Co-Governance Committee with all of the proposed changes, and it will be at that point, at some point in the future, that this Co-Governance Committee will get the opportunity to approve any changes coming through. From there is a requirement for both parties outside of this Co-Governance Committee to then re-sign the revised agreement. So it will be escalated to council, to full council for that. With regard to your second question, that will be covered off later in the agenda. An additional point that's probably of relevance is our obligations to both Whare Toa Māori Trust Board and the Kōpua Kanapa Napa. So those sorts of decisions do require us to engage with both. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no other questions from the committee, then we can go. Did you have a?
Oh, just a comment. Yes, just want to thank your team for the good work. Tautoko Stuart's comments around a good, robust process in terms of achieving its purpose, but also just remind ourselves is that these arrangements are for us to work together in terms of dealing with positive and some of the challenges that we have. One of the big ones right now is our lake level. So we just need to remind ourselves that we're not just all about this process and the paperwork and everything else. Right now we have some of Judy's whānau who have water lapping up on the front of their sections on trust land that she's a trustee on. Fortunately, she's not the chair anymore, so she won't get the blame. But yeah, these are real issues, and just with my district council hat on as well, the concerns around Whakatau in particular, but also our other Tuwharetoa settlements next door. These are all these things with Mercury and yourselves in terms of managing damage further down the river. So Karapiro on bits and pieces, those are all the on the ground things. So it's just a reminder for ourselves that yes, we need to get these things right to help us engage with each other, but also need to remind ourselves while we're doing these things. That was my comment, Kira.
Right. All right. Well, we've got a recommendation, which is receiving the report. So we'll, James, can you just put that? Oh, we look at you. You're already ahead of me. So we've got a motion that the report update on the review of the joint management agreement 20 February 2023 be received. Do I have a mover in that? Councillor Kneebone, and a second. Councillor Clarkson. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Right.
Kia ora. So the next item is assessment of the section 33 transfer of functions, and that's on page 51 of your packs. And again, Marley, we'll let you read that paper. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Co-Chair Lachlan. Before starting this next item, thanks James for putting up the presentation. Can I just acknowledge also Pete Shepherd and his team for the work that we do together under the joint management agreement, always willing to respond to our requests for involvement in our mahi. Thank you. So just very quickly, a bit of a reminder about where we're at and how this all came about, Section 33, transfer of functions. Certainly a piece of mahi worth celebrating. Back in April 2018, Council and the Trust both agreed that over an 18-month period, staff would develop a transfer of powers, duties or functions framework under Section 33 of the RMA. And this slide here sets out exactly what's in the Resource Management Act. The commitment for us to come together and focus on this mahi was independent of the joint management agreement, which was being negotiated at that time. Next slide, please, James. And so skipping ahead, I guess, to largely the outcome, following a special consultative process, which is public consultation, Council decided to approve the transfer of monitoring functions to the Trust, subject to a range of conditions, including the requirement to undertake a regular assessment. And so The first 2 years of the agreement, we are required to undertake an annual review and then a biannual review thereafter. And so this report essentially is the first review undertaken. And the opportunity to provide the Co-Governance Committee with a view of how successful Section 33 has been. Next slide, please, James. And so what has been transferred? So to begin with, council staff and trust staff identified that state of the environment water quality monitoring functions strongly aligned with the trust's aspirations. And so the first, I guess, activities on the table. These particular functions build on a program that was in place at the time when we were going through the process. We had an informal summer beach bathing monitoring program in place between the two parties, which demonstrated that this sort of work could be done by the trust. Next slide, please. At the time of entering into the agreement, we had an assessment framework within the agreement. However, it was agreed that further analysis would be required to ensure that we have a view of whether council is meeting its obligations under the transfer, but also give us a view of whether the transfer is delivering on expediencies, efficiencies and benefits that were originally anticipated when the transfer was agreed to. And so there are 3 critical success factors that are formed the assessment. They are capacity and knowledge, relationship, and also efficiencies. There were 7 respondents that were involved in the evaluation process, 2 from Te Whare Māori Trust Board. One of those people are here today, Pete Shepherd, and 5 from the Regional Council. Both Neville and I were 2 of the 5 from Regional Council. And yes, Ed Brown is with us today. Kia ora, Ed. Ed was another of the respondents involved in evaluation. Ed Brown is online. And Ed Brown is the manager who is responsible for state of the environment monitoring functions here at council. So good to have you tuned in. Thanks, Ed. And if there's any tricky questions, they might belong to you. Just moving on to the last slide really quickly then. The full assessment you can see within your agenda, and there is a really useful summary on pages 54 through to 56. But essentially, as you can see on this slide, with all the green lights, it's good news. Overall, the results demonstrate really good performance by the trust. It is accepted that early on there were some challenges due to some staff changes at the trust board end, but also COVID taking over at that time when the functions were initially transferred over. These 2 factors certainly had some impact on performance. However, they were well managed through the good relationships that the trust and the council have established over the years, good communication and good support where needed. And so, yes, again, overall, a good news story, good performance, and also, I guess, the results give us confidence that the trust does have the capacity and capability to undertake monitoring functions, and that will continue to grow. Thank you. Any questions? Comments?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Marley. In the event that the parties were of a mind to increase the number of functions that Te Whare undertook, how grey is it or how clear is it in terms of whether the council would have to go through that consultation process again?
Good question. Councillor Kneebone. So, given that what we consulted upon was specifically the monitoring functions that were transferred, any addition to functions transferred would need to undergo another special consultative process. However, the report does also, or the assessment also does, I guess, refer to the process that was undertaken. And from a staff perspective, feedback indicated that that process that is prescribed under Section 33 is challenging, particularly the requirement to undertake a public consultation process relative to what we are transferring to the Trust Board. We could have avoided such a process if we decided to enter into a contract, for example, which might be more simple in terms of process. However, we do acknowledge that the commitment to come together and undertake such a challenging process and be the first in the country to successfully do so was certainly a driver and a good reason to undertake the process, to demonstrate it can be done.
Yeah, no, I was sort of reading that with interest, and the process is frustrating, but the outcome in terms of the, I guess the mechanism by which Te Whakatau are undertaking those functions is sort of mana enhancing. But and I would assume that if it was via way of just a simple contracting arrangement, you'd be vulnerable to other competitors coming in, and the council wouldn't be obliged to offer the contract to Te Whakatau, for example. So there's sort of swings and roundabouts both sides really, but and acknowledging that it still needs to be obviously demonstrate that it's done efficiently, but
yeah, there are other challenges that come with contract and procurement, contracting and procurement. But I guess the key to selecting that sort of a process is the avoidance of public consultation. Public consultation certainly opened the door to some negativity that was potentially created as a result of misinformation, disinformation. And so I guess if we undertake a similar process in future, that is a key learning for us to ensure that I guess we are prepared for that type of a response to such a proposal, but also our communications are anticipate that and perhaps avoid as much as possible that misinformation and disinformation that is often surrounds this sort of issue.
Well, I'm assuming we could, if there was if this mechanism appeals to other iwi or Te Whakatau, or the parties would like to increase the range of functions, we could probably be a bit more generous in our consultation process, but not necessarily take all of the options up, could we? That makes sense. I mean, we could consult on the basis of a wider range of functions and what we're actually intending to transfer at that point of time, which would potentially enable us to increase the range of functions at some point in the future if the parties were of the view, but wouldn't hold either party to it.
Yeah, I guess that comes down to what you put in your proposal and making it broad enough and give it enough scope so that over time those functions might increase. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. No, not suggesting we should milk the system, but just from a practicality perspective, from the costs of consultation frustrations here.
Yeah, good point.
Is there any other questions or comments anybody had? I mean, obviously, from a Te Whakatau's perspective, it was utilising a section of the RMA that was there to improve for want of a better word, the relationship or deepen the relationship with ourselves and Regional Council. And certainly I think it's achieved that. I think we use the word mana enhancing. We're not doing this to enhance our mana, but certainly for not only the Trust Board, but also for Regional Council. I think it was a unique. I don't think anybody else is going to be in a hurry to do something similar, just because there's so much uncertainty with RMA reform and everything else. And like you say, a more traditional contracting arrangement is certainly a lot easier, for want of a better word, in terms of the political side of things. But nonetheless, and it is that monitoring, it is about water quality, and those things are uppermost, again, in the minds of not only Tūwharetoa, but all the citizens of the Taupo district. And as you're aware, from time to time, there has been the odd interesting issues with algal blooms and matting and everything else, which even resulted one year in closing the swim leg for the Ironman. So these things, they're interesting and challenging. I think it's appropriate for an iwi to be doing monitoring on their own lake. And it's worked out well, I think, for council in terms of not only having to drive all the way down and more carbon being sort of produced by exhausts in terms of their vehicles and everything else. So yes, my understanding from Peter is he's not in a hurry to be taking on too many more monitoring functions right now as he builds his team. But yes, we're very pleased to get a pass mark in terms of, like I said, through very challenging times, and hopefully we'll go from good to very good in terms of future reports. So I'm just going to call for a mover and a seconder in terms of the resolution that's on the board there. Pamela moved. Co-chair Pamela. And do I have a seconder? Stu. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried.
All right, before we move on with the agenda, I'm going to turn over briefly to our Chief Executive, Chris McClay.
Kia ora toto. Just in respect to the previous item, through you, co-chairs and co-chair Danny, there has been interest actually elsewhere in the country in the transfer, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised if other iwi elsewhere with their regional councils did look for investigate a similar opportunity. But the reason I really wanted to just make a little presentation is you may recall nearly a couple of years ago that we went to the Tatuara Awards, and we won the Bicultural Leadership Award for this very matter in the Section 33 transfer. And it was acknowledged that as in partnership, we'd achieved a first for New Zealand, and it was a great accolade to receive it. And one of our previous chairs, Russ Remington, did raise at one of these hui that he'd like to get another copy of the trophy, if you like, so that you could have it as a tonga for yourselves as well. And we've done that, and I just want to be able to present that to you today, because it truly is a magnificent achievement, and we really appreciate the partnership.
Photo for your newsletter. You would like a copy of the photo as well.
And so inscribed on it is the category winner, Waikato Regional Council and Tūwharetoa Māori Trust Board for the transfer of functions.
Yes, thank you for that. And it was a great evening.
Good, thank you for that. We have our Tūwharetoa Māori Trust Board meeting on Friday, so I'm sure Judy will be happy to hand that over to our chair and our team then. Kia ora.
I'll carry on with the next item, which is item number 9. This is page 73, the Waikato Regional Council Draft Strategic Direction. And we've got Karen Bennett to present this item. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you. E nā rangatira o Ngāti Tūwharetoa, tēnā koutou. Councillors, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this discussion about our draft strategic direction. This is a 10-year strategic direction, and we're reviewing the 3-year goals for this triennium, the 22-25 triennium, but in actual fact, this strategy covers calendar years, so it's 23 to 25. Next slide, please, James. So to ensure we have the right focus for the next 3 years, councillors are really interested in understanding our partners' views on the priorities, on the goals, but more specifically on the actions that we might undertake and work with you to achieve these goals. Once these have been landed, and these actions are some way away because we are only really just starting to think about the long-term plan. The purpose is to inform the council plans, including long-term plan, which details the work we'll do, what it will cost and how it will be funded. By way of background, this shows you the sort of strategic funnel that we've been working through, starting off with a really solid understanding of the waves of change. What are the economic, social, environmental, technological influences on our society, on the work we do and the work we do together. So that pestle, please feel free to go online. It might be of interest to you. There's some useful information to help all of us with planning. And in both the updating of this implications, the analysis of the environment in which we're working, we're cognizant of the key principles set out in iwi environmental management plans and your strategies, as well as the ongoing direction we receive through these meetings and through our informal hui, where we just share what's important to us. So we believe we have, as best we can, reflected what we've heard from you over recent years to influence our priorities and our goals. Next slide, please, James. I'm going to just whiz through the next 4 slides because these are our vision, our purpose. Our purpose is a very strong sustainability model, one that recognizes the environment underpins everything we do and that our economy and our society depends on a healthy environment. Next slide, please, James. Our organizational values are there to share and for everyone to see. Next slide, please, James. And the delivery. And this is the way we are going to achieve our strategy with a focus on customer, ensuring that we are always looking for innovation and improving digital capability and capacity, that culture, we have a strong leadership culture, and that we focus on excellence with regards to communication and engagement and our financial management. Significantly, through everything we do, Te Ao Māori influences our thinking, and we are focusing on supporting our staff to upskill and be confident in Te Ao Māori. Well-being and climate change response cuts through everything we do. So on a page, here is the summary of Waikato Regional Council's 2022-25 priorities. Water, biodiversity and biosecurity, the transition to a low emissions economy, coastal and marine, sustainable development and infrastructure, and community connections. And just to repeat, perhaps we should have even put those cross-cutting priorities at the top of that graph so you can see that everything feeds into the intent that we have a climate change response and that the 4 well-beings are our focus. Again, as I said, in terms of our excellence goal, research, data, digital capability, communications, and cost effectiveness. Thank you, James. I'm going to, through you, co-chairs, if we may we just spend some time going through these next 6 slides that looks at priorities and goals. You may have some top of mind thoughts that you want to share. And if not, that's no problem, because I'm about to send you all a link where you can provide feedback in your own time. So strategic priority water. Now, we hear this from everyone, from our partners, from stakeholders, from citizens who engage with us through our People's Panel, which is an online forum, but also when we go out to the community for conversations. Why is the #1 priority for people in this rohe? The goals, 3 big goals there. Put the health of our region's water bodies and freshwater ecosystems first when making decisions, giving effect to Te Mana o Te Wai and Te Mana o Te Awa. Prepare a multi-stakeholder plan to increase regional water security and to ensure well-being and resilience within defined environmental limits for the next 30 years. And then leverage our investment in catchment and river restoration work through funding partnerships and community actions, contributing to water quality improvements that are demonstrable in the long term. Big goals. Just wonder if I could pause.
Yeah, I guess quite surprised too with Stuart on your team as well that I mean the key one for our region is obviously Lake Taupo, but also Tapawana, but also Waikato River. And I think if you're going to be talking about why, then you need to, from an iwi perspective, have that as part of your core. Note my conflict and that myself, Stu and Tipper are on the Waikato River Authority, but our expectation would be that that would somehow be reflected as part of the strategic priority. I don't think anybody's going to question the rest of the goals that you have there. It'll be more around the detail in terms of how you can deliver those, or can you deliver those. Certainly there's a lot more discussion these days in terms of where we've sort of lost a lot of the, yeah, I'm probably not explaining myself well, but yeah, just wetlands, sort of the loss of the wetlands. My understanding that's a big part of NPSMs and everything else, and other legislation. So yeah, that'll possibly come under biodiversity, but yeah, those also be interesting challenges, I think, moving forward. And I guess from ourselves also been some incidents, whether it be Contact Energy or Taupo District Council and others, and more recently, you know, trucks falling into our lake, and whether this is the right place for that, I'm not too sure. But nonetheless, those are the on the ground level. These are the things that people have, you know, see as quite concerning. So it's just, I think it's important to somehow reflect those things as well. Certainly, even discussions with Russ in terms of making sure that all our users of water and everything else are doing that appropriately. So yeah, we look to yourselves in terms of the police type function, in terms of making sure these things are done properly. It would be off the cuff feedback. I'm sure Peter will come up with something much more interesting and email you later. But those are there, and I'm sure our Waikato Tainui people would reasonably expect the vision and strategy would be there, if not uppermost, in terms of informing the wider quarter around water. So
if I may,
feedback.
Thank you. If I may just offer some reassurance that in the explanation of why this matters, we do indeed reference the vision and strategy.
I'd probably say would need to be, my expectation would be that it would probably be a goal rather than, if anything, these things flow out of that goal in terms of Te Mana o Te Wai, etc. But yeah.
Good, thank you for that feedback.
Anyway, that's my feedback.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Through you, Co-Chair. In fact, I was just going to ask you, is that what you're requesting, explicit referral to Te Whamana o te awa in the goal.
As I said, noting my many hats, including Waikato Authority, but I would expect all of our river iwi would expect that to be there. And actually those goals flow from that. So just putting it out there, it's my expectations is that regional council and its roles, responsibilities, relationships and everything else, that would be.
No, we hear that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think some of the other matters you referred to, which are probably actions that sit underneath this, is that will help set the priority for this council going forward. We'll take note. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Right.
Did you have anything to? Thank you. And this next one, moving on to biodiversity and biosecurity, with what we want to achieve, people working together to protect and restore our unique local native plants and animals and the indigenous ecosystems they live in. With those goals being to progress a prioritised strategic pathway for our region that protects and restores biodiversity out to 2050 and beyond, ensure that an agreed region-wide biodiversity accord is in place with partner agencies, supporting and empowering communities to protect and restore the natural environment and integrate their efforts with councils and other agencies across the region. And finally, to work with others to protect ecosystems, human health and economic activities through effective pest management. And if I just pause.
Anybody had any questions or comments on the biodiversity goal?
Transition to a low emissions economy. This has been a goal that has been evolved from our last 3-year goal. And this one is much more focused on transition and a just transition so that we start shifting the way we live, how society lives. So working with others to put in place agreed options and just transition pathways for economic sectors to help guide this transition, the new way of living. Enable Waikato farmers to be national leaders in the adoption of climate smart practices and technologies by aligning with other agencies, and help facilitate or increase the use of renewable energy resources, advocate for investment decisions that support greater climate resilience and a rapid transition to a low carbon freight and distribution network through the Upper North Island. Nothing has shown us how important this is after this week. And then achieve year-on-year progress. This is our own work to keep reducing our own organisations' corporate emissions.
Any questions or comments? All laudable goals, very hard to actually do them, obviously, but you're doing it as a collaborative approach in terms of. So do you see your role as measuring these sorts of things as well, or do you just leave that to national level government? Or
we will have a role because we conduct a regional inventory, so we can monitor and measure progress over time, and also identify where we can actually achieve greatest outcomes by working together.
I mean, some of these things, like the one about enabling Waikato farmers, that's from, I guess, from the perspective of the role that we play in terms of interacting with the ag sector. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that other ag industry good organisations do as well, and we're not wanting to replicate that. Just wanting to make sure that we're sort of supporting that. And
yeah, the Climate Change Commissioner said one of the most important and perhaps if the only thing that this council does is support farmers through the water policy. Be really helpful. Thank you, James. Coastal and marine, healthy marine ecosystems that provide us with many benefits like recreation, food, improved water quality, increased resilience to climate change, and sustainable economic opportunities. So the goals adopt a Kyoto ki tai, mountains to sea approach to consider coastal ecosystems as sensitive receiving environments. Very much talking about the wetlands, for example, that you were referring to earlier, Co-Chair Lachlan. Work with communities, iwi and hapu, stakeholders and partners to carry out integrated coastal and catchment planning and restoration activities to protect and enhance coastal marine ecosystems. Encourage and empower communities and businesses to reduce harmful impacts, carry out and facilitate environmental restoration activities, and partner with communities to deliver a future-focused coastal plan. All very much, again, about partnering and working and empowering our communities. Should I keep going? Next, please, James. Another goal, another priority area here that has been thrown into stark relief following Cyclone Gabrielle, and this is the need for our planning, sustainable development, and also the resilience of our infrastructure. The goals: ensure infrastructure in the region is planned and provided for, and that it is economic, sustainable, and climate resilient out to 2050 and beyond. Help communities understand their risks and support them to develop long-term management strategies that are holistic, sustainable, and adaptive. And actively engage communities in the development of a sustainable flood management and land drainage infrastructure strategy that considers land uses, funding, and recommendations for future regional spatial plans. It's a big area.
Yeah, it's a very big area. And as you said, are you comfortable, given what we've been through in the last week or so, in terms of whether that's still enough or big enough in terms of goals, or was that more of a discussion later in terms of how much resource council can do in their long-term plan in terms of putting it towards this goal?
I think these are meaningful, important, relevant goals. I think there is a lot more discussion to come with people like yourselves and around the council table to develop this into concrete actions that can, in fact, deliver to those goals.
I think that the recent activity or recent events, that second bullet point of helping communities understand their risks and supporting them, I think that we're now painfully aware of how vulnerable some of our infrastructure is and how that impacts on communities. Inevitably, it's going to be a really challenging conversation because there's always that affordability piece as well. And how big and how high do we build our protection versus having those, well, inevitably will be challenging conversations around where we choose to live and develop. So,
Councillor Downer, got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair and Madam Chair. Just, yeah, this is probably the biggest one for me, even the point number 3 is obviously we've got a plug in our lake and only 300,000 litres can go out of it. But, you know, recently with the weather events, 1.2 million litres is coming into our lake. And also, as I mentioned before, the Tongariro River the flood management there, we've got Kuratau and then a lot of iwi land going under. And I know Mercury have kept within their limit, but, you know, do we need to readdress those sorts of things on, you know, with the extra weather events that are happening, that maybe that limit is too high? I don't know. You know, we've had a couple of seasons where there's been droughts as well, and then, you know, some boats are struggling to get into certain moorings and stuff like that. So, yeah, you know, I get a little bit frustrated listening to, you know, all these things, but it's really getting the money to do the mahi at grassroots that need doing, and unlaying the the layers of onion to know who to approach, who does it. And as Marley said earlier on, it's that miscommunication in the community of, you know, whose job it is and stuff like that. So, you know, it's just kind of like simplifying a lot of stuff, so, you know, people can see that things are getting done, or know the right channels to go through.
Thank you, Councillor Downett. Did you want to respond? Or no?
I've just have taken on board that, and
okay.
when we come to the actions, we will be making very clear who does what, when, and how.
I think there's, my comment would be, I think there's an expectation from our communities in terms of, as you pointed out, sustainable development infrastructure, actually making sure we're doing the right thing and coming up with the right solutions and stuff that will be there for the long term. That doesn't always sound, or can be quite frustrating for the likes of Councillor Downard if you're, the front of your section's eroded away and you've got people complaining, why is regional council letting Mercury do all these terrible things? So it's very, very topical, it's quite sensitive, and it is very, very sort of complicated in terms of how they manage the things. Also, Pamela has reminded me we should also acknowledge some of the dreadful things that have impacted on this community in terms of that same high water levels and everything else, including some of the Papua Niue's marae that have been impacted. So sometimes, we know that at our end, Judy's the expert on this. She was doing, our trust board was just doing a session on this the other day, but sometimes we have to take a hit to make sure that there's not an even greater impact further down this way. So there's going to be more and more pressure on regional council working with Mercury and others and ourselves, and to work out have we got that balance right. It's not simple, it's not easy, but there's going to be pressure on yourselves to make sure that you're putting the right things in place.
And good communications as well. As you say, Danny, it is a balance, and we can't all be protected from every event. So it's having other mechanisms in place to respond to those sort of events.
Thank you, James. And this is the sixth of the 6 priorities, community connections. This also was a shift. This was focused previously just on passenger transport, but councillors are very much aware of the need for leadership to bring communities together, to support social cohesion, and to ensure that misinformation can be corrected and adjusted, and that the correct information is getting out there in a timely fashion to people who need it. So starting with lead and encourage land use decisions that shape sustainable, resilient transport networks to ensure that communities have affordable access to the services, amenities and social life they value. So it's using the systems and transport as a means of connection so that people do have access to services and perhaps don't need to rely on private motor vehicles or the kindness of strangers to get them from A to B. And also, importantly, about social cohesion, develop a deeper understanding of what our communities value most, and then enabling people to participate in decisions and actions that affect them. And a lot of this is about how do we increase participatory democracy? How do people get more deeply involved in their communities to make decisions? What's there?
Keep going.
Keep going.
That's the last slide?
That's the last one. And just now, next steps, we'll be sending out a link to a survey so that we can capture all the feedback. Thank you. We'll be asking those questions you've shared as we've gone through. Next slide.
So
we'll be,
sorry, just to be clear, Karen, you're going to send that out to the committee members?
Yes.
Are you encouraging us to share that further?
Please,
or
it'll come out with a note. I'm just inviting you to share it widely, inviting Te Whakatau to respond through the survey, please. And the link comes out today and closes on the 6th of March. And then we will be collating and providing feedback to our council. They'll be receiving that on the 30th of March. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Karen. Councillor Downard, would you like to move the resolution that that the report draft strategic direction to Whakatau Māori Trust Board and WRC Co-Governance Committee be received?
With pleasure.
I'll second that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thanks, Karen.
All right, we'll go to item number 10. This is on page 97 of your agenda. Freshwater update. And
Madam Co-Chair, could I just make a couple of comments before the team presents?
certainly.
To the committee, I'd just like to apologise. And aroha mai, there has been a mix-up in the agenda papers. I don't know how, but I was just rereading the item and it refers to the joint management agreement with Te Nehi Nui, which is not yourselves. And I had a look at the report that we forwarded and that I reviewed, and I was very clear because I took out references to Te Kotahitanga in that report, which is not yourselves. So there is a report that is essentially the same as the report that you have at your fingertips, where the staff have reviewed the Te Whare Māori Trust Board Joint Management Agreement and are very aware of those clauses. So aroha mai, I don't know what happened in the word gremlins, but just wanted to give you that confidence that it is there, and we will make sure we send out that the proper report. But the team are here to speak to the report, which is in essence the same as the one that you have in your agenda, but not specific to Te Nehi Nui.
Sure. Would you like to introduce your
Sure.
team members?
So we have today with us Naomi Crawford, who is our team leader of water policy, and Peter Wishart, who is a senior advisor, senior policy advisor in our policy team. They have been having hui around Aotearoa, talking to iwi, talking to staff. I'm sure they've had conversation with Peter and some of the staff, and I'll pass over to the team. Have also briefed the team on the question that was asked by Councillor Downard, so we'll be able to respond to that. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Just need you to turn your mic on there, Peter.
Yes, I'm learning. Oh, there we go. Just as simple as that.
You might, I might have you bring that a little bit closer. For some reason, even though these are very long, you still have to get right up in it.
Right, there we go. How's that?
Great.
Yeah. Okay, kia ora committee. You'll have the paper in front of you, and Tracy's, of course, has just pointed out that there's one or two errors in there. I'm happy to speak briefly to the paper and then perhaps take questions. We don't have a presentation. So if I can, perhaps if I can just speak to the paper, Mr. Chair. Rightio. Right, the freshwater policy review, as you're probably well aware by now, is certainly out of the traps. We've had our first round of community and sector engagement, including 10 wānanga with iwi around the motu. And the information that we've received back, the feedback we've received back has been very invaluable, and we're currently compiling a report which will be made available once that has come before council for sign-off. And of course, the other thing that has been looked at is in terms of how we move forward in terms of co-governance, in terms of decision-making, and incorporating review of policy as it's being developed jointly in terms of with our JMA partners and other folk as well, of course, because it extends the whole of the rohi of Waikato. So we're talking about Hauraki and the West Coast as well. Also looking to how we might assist that process in terms of making available advisory mechanisms to ensure that what we're hearing back from the community, from sector groups and from tangata whenua, and how that translates into policy in terms of the documents which will then come before the JMA partners for agreement to then notify. And that date, of course, is looming upon us. It's December in next year, 2024. Currently, staff are developing supporting documentation around the issues and the options that flow out of those issues papers. And they're going to be used for the round 2 engagement in terms of the discussions and, as I say, starting to firm up on options and just how you might proceed with the development of of policy, which will go into the regional policy statement and the Waikato regional plan. The report also makes reference to the Healthy Rivers Waiora Plan Change 1, which is currently sitting before the Environment Court, and mediations are occurring at the moment under court direction. That possibly might come to an end if there cannot be agreement in terms of signing off on consent orders. So it might possibly be going to hearings, but we wait to see, and we wait upon the pleasure of the court in terms of that aspect. It's just a quick overview, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yes, sorry. Any questions from committee members? Any points of clarification? Any comments? Nope. All right.
Madam Co-Chair, should we just address the question asked by Councillor Downard?
Sure.
I don't know if Councillor Downard wanted to ask it of staff so they get it first hand as opposed to second hand.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you. Yeah, so I've had a couple of meetings with the Tongariro advocacy group, and also some of the local iwi down in Turangi, and they would like to know how or is there a channel that can start the process for they believe that the Tongariro River is a national significance, or could it be put in like how we talked about the coastal plans and having two of the surf being national significance, and how we go about the process of starting that, or who with first? Is it with you know, the hapu first, or yeah, what's the channel?
Okay, thanks for that. So to answer your question, that is built into the process of the freshwater policy review. So the Tongariro, we've already got direction under the regional policy statement on outstanding water bodies. So we're currently evaluating the statutory drivers and everything that needs to be thought about for outstanding water bodies. Currently, at the moment, we're looking at Te Mano Te Wai long-term visions, freshwater management units as well. So Lake Taupo obviously performs as a freshwater management unit. And we're looking at how outstanding water bodies will be incorporated into the freshwater policy review. So in relation to this whole process forms under something called the National Objectives Framework, which looks at what is the visions and the freshwater values that we will be protecting. And we have to engage with tangata whenua and the communities at every single step of that process. Does that answer your question?
Yep. So what's the time frame for something like this?
So the time frame is that we will be notifying, it's September next year is the plan. And the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management states that we must notify prior to the 31st of December 2024. So do you mean in relation to engagement, or?
Yeah, engagement, as well as, you know, the time frame for something like this. You know, is it a forever, you know, 3-year time by the time it becomes reality, or depends on, again, the layers of onions, you know, to get to the end process?
Tracy, did you want to, I see you chomping at the bit over there. Did you want to speak now, or do you want Naomi to?
No, I'll let Naomi finish, Madam Chair.
So we've got several forms of engagement. So we've got sector engagement, we've got community engagement, we've got tangata whenua engagement. And so there's several opportunities. We're basically heading towards round 2 engagement between June to August this year. So that will be looking at the high level policy direction papers that will also be presented to Council on about the 21st of April this year. So So there's several opportunities that'll be looking at the high level direction of the options. And yeah, so does that answer your question?
So, Madam Chair, just to follow on from Naomi, as Naomi said, we've already had one round of engagement with iwi, which is really just helping them understand the complexity of the process we've got to go through. We're presently planning a second round to occur, as Naomi said, in the very near future. Prior to that, we need some documents in front of council so you understand where we're at in the process. We haven't workshopped, I guess, this part of our policy program. The requirements of the National Policy Statement ask us to involve tangata whenua, iwi and hapu to the extent that they wish to be involved. Many want to be involved as much as possible, but are also mindful and are giving us messages around capacity and capability. So from a timeline perspective, we will be having the conversations in the next 3 to 4 months and coming back again next year to check in with what we've developed. As Peter and Naomi said, we have to have the document notified by December next year. Seems a way away, but it's not. Post that, the process then is in the hands of the Freshwater Commission, and they are required to make a decision within 2 years of notification. So in terms of the timeline, Councillor Downard, it's definitely not done by Tuesday, and there's a lot more conversations to have along the way. But I guess to help us, those iwi and hapu who are keen to engage, we'd love to hear from who those specific hapu may be.
Thank you, Tracy. If you could just kind of send me a timeline, even if it's a rough one of the procedure, and any of the other committee members would like one, but I definitely would, that I could take back to my constituents that have been asking me this.
Anything else, Peter, Naomi, that you'd like to cover off? All good? All right. No other questions, no other comments? Oh, yeah.
I'm happy to move.
All right. We've got a mover and Danny. Have we got a?
I'll second.
Councillor Downard. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Right. 1, 2.
So we're on to the next item, and we're doing very well for time. Proposed update to the Waikato Regional Policy Statement in response to NPS-HPL 2022. Sounds like a terrible disease.
Perhaps if I can introduce the staff.
Yes, please, Tracy.
Coach Lachlan. So the staff we have, but I've just seen it's quite the lineup. So we have Joe Paolo, or JP, who will be the primary presenter, who is assisted by Hayden Jones, who is our team leader in science for land and soil. JP is also assisted by Ashley, one of our new policy advisors, and their team leader, Alejandro Cifuentes, is sitting beside them. Again, this is a plan change to our regional policy statement that we've been mandated from central government to make happen. And we're just wanting to make sure that you are aware of it in accordance with our JMA provisions. JP.
Tēnā koutou. Thanks for the presentation, Tracy. James, we had some slides. Is it possible to put it? Or, but that's okay. So the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land became operative last year on the 17th of October, 2022. And yes, so thanks for that. So yeah, as Tracy mentioned, what we're trying to achieve here today is to give you a brief presentation of the NPS-HPL and to listen to your initial thoughts. This is very early stages on this process, and we totally understand that iwi now has many responsibilities and competing interests, and there's quite a lot of central government direction bombarding us all. So our idea is to try to facilitate this as much as possible for you to participate in this process with us. Yeah, so we hope to connect, to introduce ourselves, and to share details and how we can work together in this process. So next slide, please. So the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, I would just say NPS-HPL, became operative last year on the 17th of October, and aims to protect highly productive land, keeping it only for land-based primary production. By land-based primary production, I just would like to clarify, this is for agricultural, pastoral, horticultural, or forestry activities that rely on the resource of the land. So central government gave us now 3 years. In the next 3 years, all regional councils need to map all highly productive land. Sorry, can we move to the next slide as well? We need to map all highly productive land in the region, and we need to notify, once we have the map ready, notify this map. After we notify the regional map, all district councils will have 6 months to adopt the maps into their district plans as well. On the meantime, once we do them, there is a transitional definition for the NPS-HPL that captures all land that it's either zone rural or on a rural production zone, and has not been identified, excludes land that has been identified for future development or land that is subject of a council plan change. So for those, the NPS-HPL doesn't apply, but for all other land under the land use classification 1, 2, and 3, Hayden will talk a little bit more about the land use classification, is captured by the NPS-HPL. The NPS-HPL protects highly productive land by providing for a strong framework for avoiding urban development and lifestyle development within highly productive land. And there's strong direction on the NPS-HPL to actively involve Tangata Whenua, and that must be done at the iwi, hapu, and whanau levels. And this must be early, meaningful, and in accordance with the Kanga Māori. So yeah, we are currently on the very early stage of developing an engagement plan that will inform our engagement. And all feedback we can get from you today will help inform this engagement plan. I'll pass it on to Hayden now to talk a little bit about the mapping.
Kia ora tātou. Next slide, please. So, apologies, the previous slide. So mapping highly productive land in the region will likely involve 4 broad steps. The first will involve identifying or taking the land that has been zoned as general, rural and rural production, and then looking to see where these areas coincide with land use capability classes 1, 2, or 3. And I'll talk a little bit more about the land use capability classification in the next slide. So that's the starting point. In the second step, it'll likely involve removing, will involve removing land identified for future urban development within the next 10 years, identified within strategic planning documents. In the third step, this would involve looking to see if there's any land that's not currently or hasn't already been mapped as land use capability 1 to 3, and just determining whether there are any areas of land outside of that land use capability 1, 2, or 3 that might be considered highly productive or have the potential to be highly productive, and adding those areas in. To give an example, In another region, the Otago region, they have soils that in some areas are stony, not generally highly productive, or within that land use capability 1 to 3 range, but are important for stone fruit, horticulture, and the like. And so it's those sorts of areas that that region might look to include within their mapping. So there may or may not be any additions to add in there at the third step. Go through a process to determine that. Then in the fourth step, it'll essentially involve drawing lines around the areas of highly productive land that are sufficiently large and geographically cohesive and dominated by highly productive land. And so within those areas, it's possible there will be small pockets of non-LUC 1 to 3 land, and likewise outside of those areas there may be small pockets of LUC 1 to 3 land, but it's really around practically mapping highly productive land. On the right there is a table. This gives a brief description of each of the land use capability classes, 1 through to 8. Land use capability mapping was undertaken as part of the New Zealand Land Resource Inventory, and it essentially describes the capacity of the land to sustain productive land use into the long term. It also talks about versatility of the land. So in other words, what are the range of uses land might be suitable for? LUC Class 1 is the most versatile and productive. And as the limitations to use increase, that sort of goes up, that the LUC class number increases, and the versatility of the land decreases. The map on the left shows the distribution of LUC classes 1 to 3 within the region. You can see that there are some very large areas, particularly in the Waipa, Waikato, Matamata Piako, Hauraki districts, but also a reasonably substantial area of LUC 3 land in the upper Waikato area.
Just while we're on the slide, is there any chance you could try and zoom in on around the Taupo district, James? We're just very curious. I mean, in terms of answering your question, does Tūwharatua want to engage heavily in this process? I think it's, so this is your initial, this is basically off existing databases of land use change, land use capability.
Yes, land use capability. That's right, yeah, through the national mapping at regional scale.
Yeah. So there is a next stage where it's all fine-tuned. You're just curious from, I think in terms of answering your question, if we don't have a lot of LUC1 type land in our rohe, whether we would need to engage too much, I'm not too sure. You're aware that from a purely Tūwharatua perspective, we've never been too happy in terms of some of the landscape and natural values type things where stuff gets put on maps around our land. So certainly that's something that we don't enjoy, for want of a better word. Yes, we understand you have legal responsibilities, but in terms of Māori land, not so keen on it. My guess is, I mean, some of those will be Māori farmland, obviously more in the sort of Reparoa, getting into Ngāi sort of area. Yeah, I guess there's, and with climate change and everything else, obviously there's issues around moving into more forestry in some cases. Yeah, it's just been having a giggle in terms of how much would meet LUC1 type land in Aotearoa, given the amount of pumice, this, that, and everything else that we have, and issues with our soils. Yeah, what's it? Yeah, so we're all primarily land use LUC3. Is that not clear on that map? It's
Yes, the dark green is LUC class 3, and so it is class 1, 2, and or 3 that is a starting point together with the rural zoned land that is a starting point for beginning to identify highly productive land.
You can go next, Stu.
That other bit you mentioned on a couple of slides back, where the Otago scenario, where the land was still quite suitable for stone fruit. I mean, I would imagine there's still quite a bit of land around Taupo catchment that while it might not reach the classifications up here, it's still quite valuable in terms of agricultural production.
Yes, I suppose that's a process would need to go through in having some work done and speaking with communities in terms of their views of what might be considered to be highly productive land outside of that LUC 1 to 3. I think essentially the purpose is the NPS including that in there to allow for the protection of land outside of LUC 1 to 3 that is recognised as having importance for certain high value land uses. So it's not necessarily versatile, but whether it's viticulture or stone fruit, it's locally important. And so there is the option to include it in there if communities in the region deem so. Pardon?
So then pastoral. I'm hearing. Yeah, okay, yes, sense. Yeah.
Chris, did you have a question or comment?
No, sorry.
As a former land soil scientist?
Yeah, no, in fact, I worked very closely with Hayden in those times, and I think that Hayden's can well and truly cover it. But thank you for your memory of that, Co-Chair.
Yeah, I guess, like I said, we can probably imagine in terms of land use change, there may be some farmlands that may be considering looking at forestry. But apart from that, I'm not expecting a whole lot of residential land or anything else, development and things like that happening in terms of the areas that you've got there. Yeah, so I don't want to speak for Peter. I mean, he'll provide feedback, but I'm not expecting us to be too heavily involved in the process, if that makes sense. I mean, like, just kept in the loop, but we don't envisage that we'll be heavily engaging as the Whakatau Māori Trust Board or through the JMA in terms of that this process. My personal view is they needed to do this 10, 15, 20 years ago, a bit concerned with developments of Pukekohe and everywhere else. So fully appreciate and understand it. And for me, it's a no-brainer. Just politicians didn't seem to have the say what I'm thinking. But yeah, in terms of providing for food security in our nation. So, yep, if you could keep us in the loop, that'd be great, but we don't expect to be, compared to all the other work streams that we've been covering today, be as that engaged. And just for yourselves, just be a little bit sensitive in terms of Māori land, in terms of putting things over titles and everything else, that that's not something that we're too pleased with. And you'll find that we're generally responsible in terms of how we use our lands and bits and pieces. Any other questions or comments?
Yep. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, you keep going for your finishing. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to complement that the NPS-HPL also provides for exceptions for Māori specified Māori land. Yeah, that's what describes.
Atamari koutou katoa. I'll talk a little bit about the slide. So what does the NPS-HPL mean for Māori land? It does, as JP mentioned, provide specific exceptions for specified Māori land that is considered highly productive, and the NPS won't restrict subdivision use or development on this land. So the NPS does provide a definition for specified Māori land, and it's included in the box in the middle of the slide. So you can see that Māori customary land, Māori freehold land, as defined in Te Ture Whenua Māori Act is included in that definition, as well as land subject to the Māori Reserved Land Act, so Māori reservation land, land considered a legal entity or person, the maunga listed in Ngā Mana Whenua or Tāmaki Makaurau Collective Redress Act, and land held on behalf of iwi and hapu that is held with the intention of returning the whenua back to those who hold mana whenua. So that's the definition that's provided in the NPS. We've just taken it straight from there into the slide. And we wanted to note that that definition for specified Māori land doesn't include general land owned by Māori, and that process for changing the, I suppose, ownership structure of that is a separate process under Te Ture Whenua Māori. And then also that land zoned Māori purpose zone is not considered in the highly productive land definition because that is specific to general rural and rural production zones. So therefore the provisions of the NPS don't apply to that land as well. Yeah, so I also wanted to touch sort of on the process and I guess what our initial thinking is for responding to this national direction for the Waikato Regional Council. And yeah, just do a bit of a kōrero around what we're thinking so far. So one of the things that we're working on is a project management plan, and that's currently in development and outlines sort of the approach for the RPS change or the regional policy statement to give effect to this. We're also working on a communication and engagement strategy, as JP mentioned. We are looking to establish a working group with the territorial authorities in the Waikato region. The national policy statement provides quite clear direction that we need to collaborate with TAs when we're developing the HPL map. So we think a forum of some sort would be a good platform for that, and we're looking to establish that. And then also we've looking at establishing a regional network with all of the other regional councils across the country. That's not a mandatory requirement, but it's something that we think will be a useful tool for us to just ask questions and talk to each other about how it's being approached in other regions, so that there's a bit more consistency perhaps, and we can learn from other regions as well. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, so just to wrap it up, so this is very, very early stages. We're taking this to council actually on the 1st of March for the first time. And yeah, so that's how we wish to start this process. So what I'm hearing from, so you would be happy for us just to keep you regularly updated. So we'll just, after this meeting, we'll just send like a formal notification of that we're aiming to start this process, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much.
Kia ora. So yeah, only a couple of comments here. So for us, it might be when you get to the stage where you've got the list of the lands that are in our catchment area, that might be useful for our team just to get a feel for that. The second one too, just noting that there's a conflict between this and say our variation 5. We're quite keen on moving. We had been historically keen on moving land away from farming and moving it more towards forestry to protect the Lake Taupo from the nitrates and everything else. So just I'm not too sure how you consider that in terms of this work, but it is a bit ironic. Yeah. Luckily, we've got horrible pumice land in our area. So.
Yes, I can answer that. So forestry is included within the definition of productive land use in terms of the NPS, and so it's just looking to protect highly productive land for that full range of productive land uses, including forestry.
Just call for a mover and a seconder then, in terms of the resolution. Moves Stu, seconded Judy Harris. All those favors say aye. Against, carried. Ka pai. Still sticking to time.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we might want to drag it out because we've heard that lunch is not coming until 1 and they can't bring it any sooner. So, so we either fill the time or we fill the time. All right, so we're now on to item 12. This is on page 112 of your agenda. RMA update of legislative reforms, and we have Director Tracy May. And do we have Hannah online?
We do. We do.
And we have Hannah Craven
Madam
online.
Co-Chair. So if you wanted a topic to stretch things out till 1 o'clock,
this would
have
be
we
it.
got the topic for you? No, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We were asked to prepare this paper by Director Williams. Really, there's a lot going on in this space. We have, I think, from a council perspective, worked a bit of a miracle getting our comprehensive submission lodged with the select committee and the full line that afforded us. What we have got today is some kind of feedback going on. Oh, turn it on, turn it off. We've got a presentation that Hannah will shortly take you through, which is essentially the high points. It's between about 5 to 10 minute presentation. We're more than happy to share with Te Whare Māori Trust Board our presentations that we've given our council. We've already shared with each of our territorial authorities, our iwi partners and Waikato River Authority, our submission that we lodged. We also know that we have a bunch of people that we can set to this, whereas most of our iwi partners, it's one person and somebody else who they can get to give a bit of time through koha to help them through it. So I'll get Hannah to take you through it, and at the moment we are just trying to negotiate a time with the select committee, with our chair and chief executive, who we've been allotted 25 minutes, which is 15 minutes more than what we usually get, to speak to our submission. So we're just finalising some of those talking points at the moment. So Hannah, I'll pass over to you and let you take the committee through.
Kia ora tātou. Can I get confirmation you can hear me all right?
We can.
Perfect, thank you. Kia ora tātou, ko Hannah Craven tōku ingoa, I tipu aku o ki Kemereti, kei tamaki makaurau ahau e noho ana, he kai whakahaere kaupapa here o I te konihera o Rahui o Waikato. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Hi all, my name is Hannah Craven. I've just got a brief presentation for you today on the government's resource management reform program, although I may try and drag it out a little bit, but do stop me if I'm carrying on too long. Could we switch slides, please? So this is the most substantial reform of the resource management system in the past 3 decades. The Resource Management Act has governed a lot of what WRC does, and it's proposed to be repealed completely and replaced with 3 new acts, 2 of which were released in late November last year for submissions. Given the bills made up a combined 900 pages and contain some drastically different content to the Resource Management Act, we found that submission timeframe quite tight. But we were fortunately able to pull together a team from across council to analyse the bills and write detailed submissions on each. As Tracy mentioned, we lodged those submissions in early February, and our chair and chief executive will be presenting our submission to the select committee in the next week or so. We understand government's intention is to pass these bills before election this year, so that will be around August, we believe. It's also worth noting that the third piece of legislation, the Climate Adaptation Act, hasn't been released yet. We're expecting to see this towards the end of the first quarter of 2023. Slide, please. So just a little background on why government decided to reform resource management legislation. The RMA has been in place since 1991 and since undergone multiple amendments, but it's still critiqued that it misses the mark in several key areas. The reform is aimed at addressing 5 key issues, which are: 1, the environment continues to be degraded; 2, planning is too expensive and takes too long; 3, approvals also take too long; 4, the response to climate change has been inefficient; and 5, the present resource allocation system is not compliant with the principles of Te Tiriti. So today I'll be providing a quick overview of the key concepts of the 2 new bills and what we at WRC understand this means for local government and iwi, hapu and Māori. Slide, please. So as shown in the left column on the diagram on the screen, the Natural and Built Environment Bill, which is the real meaty piece of legislation and the key replacer of the RMA, has 3 sort of main layers to it. The bill itself sets up the purpose and outcomes of the new system and the decision-making principles those acting under the bill must follow. The second layer is the National Planning Framework, which will contain national level direction on key resource management matters, including freshwater, biodiversity, infrastructure, etc. Government hasn't yet released the first version of the National Planning Framework, but we know that it will essentially look like a combined version of all existing national direction. So that's the national policy statements and national environmental standards, as well as some new content for matters like infrastructure, cultural heritage, and climate change. The National Planning Framework will also be responsible for setting limits and targets for resources at a national level and providing direction on how to resolve conflicts between environmental outcomes. The next layer down is the Natural and Built Environment Plans, which are combined plans, 1 per region, to replace existing district plans, regional coastal plans, and regional policy statements. And then below that, there will still be resource consents, although the form and processes for these has also changed a bit. Then to the right, we have the Spatial Planning Bill, which is a much smaller piece of legislation, but with completely new content. Its main purpose is to set up the process for preparing regional spatial strategies, which will sit alongside the Natural and Built Environment Plan to set out the vision, objectives, strategic direction, and priority actions for each region over a 30-year time period. We're almost envisaging these strategies would look like a bit like a regional policy statement, but with an added spatial element. And then underneath these are implementation plans and agreements to implement the strategies. Next slide, please. So the purpose of these new bills is different to that of the RMA. Instead of being about sustainable management of the environment, the new purpose is to enable use, development and protection of the environment, and also recognise and uphold te oranga o te taio. We also need to promote outcomes for the benefit of the environment, comply with environmental limits and targets, and manage adverse effects. These components need to be considered equally rather than to be in conflict with each other. The front end of the bill also sets out a number of system outcomes which plans must provide for. There is no hierarchy established between these outcomes, which is something we raised concern with in our submission. Not that there needs to be a hierarchy as such, but there needs to be some level of national guidance as to how we can manage cases where outcomes conflict. The bill also sets out key decision-making principles that persons exercising powers under the Act must follow, which include increased responsibilities to recognise and provide for the responsibility and mana of each iwi and hapu. Slide, please. I'm just going to cover quickly a few key areas of interest. Regional planning committees are a new entity or body under the new system, which will be responsible for preparing natural and built environment plans and regional spatial strategies, as well as setting allocation approaches for freshwater takes, diversions and discharges. These committees are to be made up by the authorities in a region, including iwi and hapu. There must be at least 6 members total, with a minimum of 2 Māori appointments. We particularly stressed in our submission that determining a committee composition for Waikato will be more than challenging, considering it has 12 local authorities and a significant number of iwi and hapu. These committees will be jointly funded by local government and supported by a host authority and secretariat, which must also be decided by all authorities in the region, defaulting to regional council where agreement cannot be reached. Slide, please. Right, specific to Māori, there are some key changes in the bills, particularly te tiriti must be given effect to, where the RMA said that the treaty must be taken account of. Te ture whaimana is specifically referenced and must also be given effect to. There is to be a new national Māori entity responsible for ensuring the above. Planning committees must also initiate engagement agreements with Māori groups in its region. Particular regard is to be given to iwi management plans and Mātauranga Māori, and mana responsibility, kawa and tikanga are to be recognised and provided for. Slide, please. So this slide summarises the new entities and processes particularly relevant for Māori. Those I haven't already mentioned include the Limits and Targets Review Panel. If the National Planning Framework proposal contains limits or minimum level targets, the responsible minister must appoint a panel to advise on the extent to which those limits or targets basically are effective. Members of this panel must have knowledge and experience of Mātauranga Māori, amongst other things. Iwi and Hapu committees. The committee formed by iwi and hapu in a region for the purpose of A, agreeing with local authorities the composition and arrangements for the regional planning committee, and B, leading the process to determine one or more Māori appointing bodies. And Māori appointing bodies are the bodies to be agreed by all iwi and hapu in the region to then appoint members onto the regional planning committee. Like I mentioned, RPCs must initiate engagement agreements with Māori groups to agree and record how Māori groups will participate in preparing a plan and how their participation will be funded by the committee. Iwi statements of outcomes, I understand, can take whatever form iwi see fit and can essentially be existing iwi management plans. And lastly, an iwi or hapu may provide a statement on te oranga o te taio to the Regional Planning Committee at any time. Slide, please. So the bill sets up a new freshwater allocation scheme. Historically, resources such as freshwater have been allocated on a first in, first served basis. Under the MBE, the allocation method will be a merit-based approach that will focus on sustainability, equity, and efficiency. These parts of the legislation require additional thinking to ensure that these three principles are well understood. I'll go for the last slide, please. Oh, that's a bit blurry, sorry. But lastly, we've got 10 years until the RMA is supposed to be fully phased out, and even this we think is an optimistic timeframe. The work that we're currently doing relating to freshwater planning and the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, etc., that's not going away. It's supposed to be business as usual for us until told otherwise. But we are cognizant of the upcoming change and starting to think about how these new entities and processes will work in the Waikato. And obviously things may keep evolving through the select committee process, so we're keen to keep an open channel of communication about this stuff and hear your perspectives on it all. I think that's me. Thanks everyone for your time. Kia ora.
All right, any questions, comments?
Sorry,
Tracy?
Madam Co-Chair, perhaps if I can just, I've got our top 5 significant concerns with the bill. I thought they might just be useful to share with
It was going to be my question.
Really, we've led off with it's been very difficult for us to make informed comments on the proposals when so much of the information is missing or still in development. So as we've said before, we're kind of building the plane as it's been flowing. So it's very difficult to see all the pieces together. Obviously, we've had a very short time frame to consider the bill, and we know there will be things we've missed. We don't consider, as Hannah said, there were criticisms of the RMA, everything takes too long, everybody gets to have a say. From our perspective, we see the additional processes that have been built into the system actually won't make it simpler. It's going to be really difficult to determine whether this is better when it's going to take a minimum of 15 years to implement, and everybody will be getting hoha along the way. So it's just going to be a constant process of review, as well as trying to get on and do our day jobs. We also believe that it's very cumbersome, very complex. There are some matters that will require clarification, and that has been one of the key tenets of our submission, is clarify as much as possible. Otherwise, the people who will have the most success will be the lawyers, defining new case law, particularly words, expressions of Māori. We know that when the Resource Management Act came in, people scratched their heads for many, many years trying to understand what mana whenua was, because it was a new concept introduced in the RMA, and what does it mean? So we had to wait for case law. So we're saying, please do not repeat that. Please get the terms right. Please get, when you are referencing hapu, iwi, marae, tangata whenua, te tiriti, the treaty, please be very clear what you want us to do with that. And just one last thing, I guess, and it's something that our chair and Chris will be reiterating at the select committee, is the issue of the complexity of the Waikato region, both from a natural resources point of view. We've talked about the water coming in from Whanganui through to Kānu and to Taupo, and that water being used as far away as Tamaki Makaurau. Not only that, we have upwards of 180 hapu in our region. How we are to who do not have the depth of capability and capacity, definitely not from the start, that, you know, the positive things of the reform are going to be looking for in terms of iwi engagement. The capacity there and the capability, we just haven't got enough people coming through to be trained. So that's a real challenge.
All right, any other comments? No? All good. Have I got a mover that the report be received? Councillor Kneebone, second. Trustee Harris. No, oh, that was Councillor Downard got in there very quick, very responsive. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. That's the end of the agenda, isn't it?
Yeah, finish ourselves.
Yes, you go ahead.
Just would like to thank our attendees. Sorry we couldn't give you a lift, Councillor Downard. We'll be mindful next time, but although next time I think it'll be held in the Taupo Rohi, so you won't have to go as far. I just want to thank our regional council team and Peter for coming up, and lovely, my new co-chair, Pamela, lovely. Yes, I've been through a few chairs in recent times, but yes, I'm still here. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is we've all got a copy of the Karakia, so we can, I think we'll do it all together, close this up, and safe trip on your way home. You get another copy?
We did. I know that Tosh in there was sending desperate messages to the caterers to see if they can get it here by 12:30.